Hello and welcome to this video about creating a simple journaling tool in Bash. So I've created a list of the features that I'd like this script to have. The first feature is simply being able to append a particular entry to the day's journal just by writing journal followed by whatever we want to add as our entry. Feature 2 is when we run the script itself, by default it will just print all of today's entries. And then the third feature is like the first feature, but allows us to pass in some date, and that date can be either a string to be parsed in a sort of more natural way, such as last Monday, or a full date, for example, 2022 07-01. And then the fourth feature I'd like to create is essentially the same as the second feature, but being able to print out all entries for a particular date. And like feature 3, it'll be able to take either a full string date or some more human readable date. So the file structure I'd like it to use is just in our home directory, or possibly configurable to some other directory. It'll create a journal directory, and then a year directory, a month directory, and then files containing all of the entries for a particular day. And what feature 1 will do, for example, will just create the file structure, if the file structure doesn't exist, the directory structure, and append to today's file, essentially. Likewise, the commands that find and print entries will just look for the particular file and print out its contents. So let's get started writing the script itself. So here you'll notice I've got the #bang bin bash as the first line of the script, and this is really just telling the shell which interpreter to use when running this script. In this case, it's just bash. If you were writing a Perl script, for example, you would replace it with Perl, but why on earth you would do that, I have no idea. We'll start by creating feature 1, which was just adding an entry to today's journal. And to do that, we want to figure out what today's date is. Luckily, the date command exists for providing, formatting, and parsing dates, which we can demo in our bash shell over here. So if I write date, I'll just get today's date, which is formatted in a not particularly convenient way for creating our file structure that we've mentioned here. So luckily we can provide a format using simply by adding plus and then some format specifiers, and that will print out in the sort of year, month, date format. So over in our script, let's create a variable called date and simply assign it to today, formatted in the year, month, day format. Here I'm making use of this $sign brackets either side of this, and that's called command substitution. And essentially it's just as straightforward as it'll run this command and output the value that it returns. We can demonstrate this in our terminal over here. So here I'm just echoing today's date is, and then using the command substitution to print the date. And it just simply calls the date inside this command and places the result in the echo command. So the next variable we'll need is the entry text itself, and that's coming just from the input of whatever we pass into the script. The way bash passes in these arguments is using the $@ symbol. So therefore we can simply just set our entry equal to $@ and that will set entry to whatever arguments we pass into our script. So those two variables set, we can start thinking about creating the directory structure. So let's start by creating a variable called entry directory that is a string containing our file, our list of directories. So here I'm making use of Bash's way of doing substrings. So I'm getting from our date variable, I'm offsetting to the first character, the 0th character, and then pulling out the next 4 characters, which will be the year part. And then likewise over here, I'm offsetting to the 5th character and pulling out the next 2 characters, which will be the month. So to illustrate that, I can just, in my terminal, set up a date like that. And then if I offset to the 0th character and then pull out the 4 characters, I'll get 2022. And if I were to do the same thing, but with an offset of 5 and a length of 2, I'd get out 07, i.e. the month. The entry file is simply the entry directory combined with the date, and in this case, I'll add just the MD or Markdown file extension. So to create the entry directory itself, we use the mk directory command, and we add the p to recursively create the directories. To append text to a particular file, we can make use of the double greater than sign. And what this does is take whatever you have on the left and write it or append it to the file that you've got specified on the right. And it'll also create the file if it doesn't exist. And finally, to give a bit of feedback to the user, we'll just print out a description of what happened. So in this case, we added some entry text to the date journal. So let's see if we can see this in action. So what this should have done is created the directory structure and then also wrote and also appended to there, went to the zoo, to the Markdown file. And we can just view the contents of the entry that was created using less. And we see that the contents are as expected. The next feature we want to implement is printing today's journal entries. This is fairly easy to do, as all we really want to do is check whether an entry text has been passed in, and if none has, just print the contents of the entry file. Otherwise, we'll just carry on to do what we're currently doing, i.e. creating the entry file. So Bash, like basically any other language, has if statements, of course, although they do look a little bit strange. So to check whether a variable is set, we can use the -z operator. So if the entry variable is not set, then simply print the contents of entry file. And we'll also echo the date, so it's a bit clearer what's being read from. One thing to note is that the cat command will fail if the file doesn't exist, so we'll just check whether the file exists, and if it doesn't, we'll just print out no entries. And to check whether a file exists, we use the -f operator and pass in our entry file. And now if we run our command and don't provide any arguments, we should just see the contents of the today journal file printed, which we do. And if I add some new stuff and then reprint it, we should see the additional lines. Now things start to get a bit trickier, because we want to start adding in an option, a dash D option to allow the user to pass in a date. A good way to do this is to use get ops, which essentially steps through all of the arguments that we pass into the script, looking for a particular flags that we've set, optionally with values for these flags. In our case, we will definitely want a value because that's the whole point of the D flag. So to use get ops to look for a particular option, for example, D with a value, which is what the colon means here. If you specify just like A, B, C, for example, without colons, that just means they're just raw flags rather than flags options with a value. So the option here tells get ops to provide the option name, i.e. D, in the option variable. The value get ops found for the option is put into the op arg variable. So tying everything together, we can see that while get ops is looping through the input arguments, if we happen to come across a D option, we'll set the date equal to whatever value it's found. Another variable getOps provides is called opt_ind or ind, which tells us which arguments getOps read up to when it was parsing the options. So this is helpful as it tells us where the text entry starts. So for example, in this, if we were to pass in this command, we can see that getOps would read the D, read this value, and then it would essentially stop, if you like, here, and therefore the value of opt ind would be equal to 3, i.e. 1, 2, 3, and that tells us that from the third argument onwards is the text entry. So what that means is we have to modify our entry a little bit to make use of this opt ind. And what this syntax is doing here is kind of similar to our substring, but instead of getting so many, it will just keep going until the end, i.e. from today, the third element, all the way to the end. So now that we have the date that the user passes in, which may be a string like last Thursday or yesterday, tomorrow, and so on, we want to make use of our good friend, the date function, again, to parse that into our year, month, date format. So to do that, we are essentially going to add a -d to our date command here, and then pass in the date provided, and if that date isn't provided, we'll just pass in today's date like we were before. So this is what we're doing here. So if a date is provided, then use that. Otherwise, we'll default, which is what this comma minus sign means, with default to just calling the date again, which is essentially the same as what we were doing if we removed all of that. And then, of course, still providing the format as well, so that we get the year, month, date output in the end. One thing to note actually is that a bash script will keep going even if there's an error. So one way this could error is if the user provides something that can't be parsed, like if they just provide hello or something like that, then this command will fail, possibly just returning a blank, and then we'll move on to creating an empty file just that's called .md, because this is blank, and screw up our sort of journal folder a little bit by just having this weird .md file that we don't really want. So to handle the error, we can use the OR operator and then just exit the command, exit the script with a 1, which means a failure essentially. So 0 is success and 1 is failure. And this is acting very similar to the JavaScript OR. So it's if what's on the left fails, then do this command. But if what's on the left succeeds, then don't worry about it, just carry on as normal. So now hopefully we can add a journal for a particular date, for example, last Monday, like we've got here. And we should also be able to view this at the same time. So we're getting the fourth feature basically for free by just passing in our D with last Monday. And we do indeed get our entry as expected, and it's been written to the last Monday journal. So one last thing that I'd like to add is just a bit of help for the user essentially. So I'll add this function in called usage, and it just has a bunch of examples of how to use the application. And we'll add a flag that doesn't expect a value, so no comma, called h, that if the user passes in, will print the usage and then just exit. So we can just add to our case statement and simply call the usage method and then exit. 0 this time for success. And just to capture the case of any additional unknown options, we'll add this or anything essentially. So it will capture, for example, -J or -A, anything like that. And we may as well also modify our sort of error scenario here a little bit so that it calls the usage and then exits, just so that the user gets a bit more information on what's going on or sort of how to use the application. So it will still tell them that they've passed in an invalid date, but then also print the usage information. So hopefully we can just go journal -H and it will print our usage. And if we were to pass in an invalid date like hello, it should tell us that our date's invalid and then just also print the usage information. And you can see it's my prompt is now red, which just means the last command failed. And we can check the last command, the return code of the last command that was run by just echoing $%, and that is 1, and where that 1 is coming from is right there. So there we have it, a nice and simple journal tool written in Bash. I think we've covered like quite a lot of interesting topics here. So obviously getting out or parsing the input arguments, working with dates, command substitution, all sorts of substringing and working with lists of stuff, some if statements and things like that, and working with the file system and creating directories. I hope you found it useful, and if you have any ideas for sort of similar kind of roughly hour-long scripting tasks like this that you'd like me to have a stab at, please let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching.